After the human delegation departed, Zekthar retreated to his private chamber aboard the Vecturian flagship. The encounter left him unsettled in ways he couldn't articulate to his subordinates. He activated his personal terminal and reviewed the recordings of Captain Reyes during their meeting. "Computer, analyze the human facial expression classified as smile," he commanded. The artificial intelligence hummed softly. The expression involves the upward curving of the mouth corners, revealing dentition. In most documented species, this indicates submission or fear. In primates, it can signal aggression. Human literature suggests it conveys pleasure, amusement, or goodwill. Zekthar froze the image on Reyes' face. Something didn't align with any of those explanations. Her eyes held a calculation that contradicted the supposed warmth of her expression. His second-in-command, Sub-Admiral Vex, entered without announcement, as was his privilege. "The High Council requests your initial assessment of the humans," he said, mandibles clicking with excitement. "They're particularly interested in exploration rights to the unclaimed systems near human space." "Tell them we should proceed with caution," Zekthar replied, still studying the frozen image. Vex's head crest flattened in disappointment. "Caution. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their weapons are practically ceremonial compared to our defensive capabilities." Zekthar gestured to the screen. "Look at her eyes, not their technology." She agreed to our terms without negotiation. "No species does that unless they see a greater advantage we've overlooked. Perhaps they're simply grateful for contact with an advanced civilization," Vex suggested, his tone making clear he thought his superior was overreacting. A notification flashed on the terminal. The humans had sent a data package, cultural information as a gesture of goodwill. Zekthar opened the files while Vex watched over his shoulder. The first document was a historical overview of human conflicts. The sheer number was staggering. These fragile creatures had spent most of their recorded history fighting each other with escalating brutality and innovation. "Impossible," Vex whispered. "No species could advance while destroying themselves at this rate." The next file contained human artistic creations, stories of imagined futures. Zekthar was disturbed by the recurring themes. Humans surviving catastrophes, humans overcoming vastly superior aliens, humans adapting to impossible conditions through sheer determination. They fantasize about their own destruction. He noted, then imagine overcoming it through tenacity and what they call thinking outside normal parameters. Cultural mythology, Vex dismissed. All species have creation myths. These aren't creation myths. They're rehearsals, Zekthar countered. They've been practicing for disaster their entire history. Before Vex could respond, another notification appeared. Captain Reyes was requesting a private channel. Zekthar accepted the transmission. Her face appeared, that same smile firmly in place. "Admiral, we've been reviewing your proposed navigation charts for the journey to your home system. We've taken the liberty of suggesting an alternative route that reduces travel time by approximately 28%. The data appeared on his screen. The calculations were flawless, using principles of gravitational slingshotting that the Vecturian Confederacy had only theorized. "How did you?" Zekthar began. "Oh, we're just good at puzzles," Reyes replied, her smile widening slightly. "We look forward to visiting your homeworld next month. Until then, Admiral." The transmission ended. Zekthar sat in silence, his primary heart racing uncomfortably. "Perhaps," Vex began uncertainly, "perhaps we should revise our assessment." Zekthar nodded slowly. "Yes, and we should carefully consider what else they see that we don't." The Vecturian scientists huddled around the laboratory terminals, their agitation evident in the rapid clicking of their mandibles. On the central display floated a holographic representation of the modified drive system the humans had implemented. "It violates 3 of our fundamental engineering principles," muttered Chief Scientist Krelvon, his scales shifting to a troubled orange hue. "The thermal conduits should have melted within seconds of activation." "Yet they didn't," Zekthar observed quietly. 3 years as overseer of human affairs had taught him to expect the unexpected from these bipeds. They've bypassed the gravitational interference problem by simply ignoring it, another scientist said, incredulity evident in her tone. They created a harmonic resonance that essentially allows the ship to ride the interference waves rather than fighting against them. Zekthar turned away from the display. And how long would it have taken us to discover this approach? The scientists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Krelvan answered, "We wouldn't have. Our theoretical models explicitly ruled out this approach. It shouldn't work." A soft chime announced an arrival. Fleet Commander Rice entered the laboratory with that perpetual smile. Now accompanied by a tall human male she introduced as Dr. Chen, their lead propulsion engineer. "I trust you've had time to study our modifications," Rice asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Your approach defies established physics," Krelvan stated flatly. Dr. Chen laughed, a sound that still made the Vecturian's sensory ridges quiver uncomfortably. "No, it simply defies established assumptions. The physics work fine. Would you care to explain how you arrived at this solution?" Zekthar asked, watching Rice carefully. Her smile shifted slightly, a subtle change he learned to recognize as amusement. Dr. Chen was inspired by watching his daughter surfing in the ocean. Natural waves, gravitational waves. Patterns are patterns. You based a revolutionary propulsion breakthrough on water recreation. Krelvan's voice rose to a pitch that suggested either outrage or awe. "Humans make connections between disparate concepts," Rice said with a casual shrug. "It's just how we think." Later, as Zekthar escorted the humans back to their quarters, Rice slowed her pace to match his lumbering gait. "Your scientists seem troubled, Admiral," she observed. "They are concerned about the rapid pace of human adaptation to our technology," he admitted, seeing no point in deception. Rice nodded thoughtfully. "The High Council believes they've given us just enough to keep us grateful, but not enough to make us equal partners. They're wrong." She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "We've already resolved the plasma containment issues in your weapon systems, though we haven't shared that yet. Your shield harmonics can be increased to 300% efficiency with minimal modifications." Zekthar's primary heart almost stopped. "How do you know about our shield systems? Those specifications weren't included in the technology exchange." That smile again, but now Zekthar saw the edge behind it. "We observe, we analyze, we make connections. By the time you realize how much we've learned, we'll have already moved beyond it." She resumed walking, leaving Zekthar momentarily frozen in place. "Why tell me this?" he finally asked, hurrying to catch up. "Because you're the only one watching us carefully," she replied. "And someone should be." That night, Zekthar composed his report to the High Council, carefully documenting his concerns about the rapidly accelerating human technical capabilities. He received a one-line response. "Your cultural paranoia is noted but unnecessary. Focus on trade advantages." As he stared at the dismissive message, his private terminal chimed with an encrypted file, "Human colony development plans for the next 5 years." The sender was anonymous, but Zekthar knew instantly who had sent it. And what troubled him most wasn't the ambitious scope of the plans, but the realization that Fleet Commander Rice wanted him to see them. She was warning him. But why? They'd done what? Zekthar could barely keep his voice steady as he reviewed the report on his private terminal. His head, a young Vecturian named Kress, shifted uncomfortably. "According to our intelligence, the humans have established a self-sustaining colony on Draconis IV. They've been there for approximately 7 months. Zekthar's scales flickered between colors of disbelief and alarm. Draconis IV had atmospheric pressure 14 times that of Earth, coupled with gravity nearly double what humans evolved under. The Vecturian Confederacy had classified it as uninhabitable for any known sentient species. How are they surviving?" he demanded. Kress projected a hologram showing environmental suits unlike any Zekthar had seen before. These aren't just protective gear. They've integrated neural interfaces and exoskeletal components that essentially transform the wearer's physical capabilities. And the children? Zekthar asked, remembering the briefing that families had been included in the colonization effort. Cress hesitated. That's where it becomes concerning. The children born on Draconis IV appear to be developing natural adaptations to the environment. Denser bone structure, enhanced lung capacity, thickened skin layers. Later that day, as Reyes guided him through the sprawling orbital shipyard, Zekthar watched her closely. 10 years had passed since their first meeting, yet she moved with the same confident energy, despite the silver threading through her once dark hair. "I'd like to discuss Draconis IV," he said abruptly, interrupting her explanation of a new propulsion system. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. That smile simply widened slightly. Lovely little world. The sunsets are spectacular through all that atmospheric density. "You've altered your children to survive there," he stated flatly. "Genetic manipulation on that scale violated 17 articles in our treaty." Reyes shook her head. "No manipulation was required. We simply created conditions that encouraged natural adaptation. Human children are remarkably plastic in their development." She gestured toward a viewport where Earth hung blue and serene in the distance. "Our homeworld has every environment imaginable. Deserts, Arctic wastes, high mountains, deep oceans. Humans have always lived in places we shouldn't be able to survive." They passed a construction bay where workers assembled a vessel of unfamiliar design. Zekthar paused, analyzing its configuration. "That incorporates Zentari phase technology," he observed. "The Zentari are notoriously protective of their innovations. They've never shared them with the Confederacy despite centuries of diplomatic efforts." Reyes nodded. "They gave it to us in exchange for music and poetry. They found our artistic expressions emotionally transformative. You traded cultural artifacts for advanced technology." Zekthar couldn't mask his astonishment. "Value is subjective, Admiral," she replied. "The Zentari can create magnificent technology, but struggle with abstract expression. We gave them something they couldn't create for themselves." At the conclusion of the tour, they stood in an observation deck overlooking Earth's night side, city lights glittering across the continents. Reyes handed him a data crystal. "What is this?" he asked, accepting it cautiously. "Complete technical specifications for 67 Vecturian systems we've improved," she said. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Why give this to me personally rather than through official channels?" Her smile remained, but her eyes turned serious. "Because your High Council doesn't understand what's happening. They think they're managing us, guiding our development along paths they control." She gestured toward the vast shipyard. "Does this look control to you?" "You're moving too quickly," he said quietly. "Other species will see it as threatening." "We don't have a choice," she replied enigmatically. "Time is shorter than anyone realizes." The aftermath of the battle brought an uncomfortable silence to the Vecturian High Command chamber. Zekthar stood before the assembly, 17 pairs of compound eyes fixed upon him as the holographic replay of the human defense of Ta Sidi Station concluded. "Impossible maneuvers," muttered Fleet Commander Vextal, who had once dismissed Zekthar's concerns about humans. "Their navigation systems should have failed under those G-forces. They disabled their safety protocols," Zekthar explained. "According to their after-action report, the human captains manually overrode their ship's automated safeguards." High Chancellor Krivox leaned forward. "Are you suggesting their pilots knowingly risked structural failure of their vessels?" "More than risked it," Zekthar confirmed. "The vessels sustained significant damage from their own maneuvers. 17 crew members died from catastrophic systems failures, not enemy fire." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Such tactics violated every principle of Vecturian military doctrine, which prioritized technological advantage and minimal casualties. "The human approach appears chaotic," continued Zekthar, "but analysis reveals sophisticated pattern recognition. They identified weaknesses in Corvan tactical responses within minutes of engagement. Each seemingly random action was designed to create confusion in the Corvan targeting systems, which rely on predictive algorithms. He advanced the holographic display to a close-up of one human vessel as it deliberately vented atmosphere to alter its trajectory, while simultaneously using the expelled gas to obscure Corvan sensors. This captain, he noted, sacrificed life support in 3 sections of her ship to achieve this maneuver. 42 crew members were exposed to vacuum for 17 seconds before emergency systems activated. And they survived this? Asked a junior counselor, mandibles clicking in disbelief. Most did. Humans can survive brief vacuum exposure. Their captain knew this and calculated the risk as acceptable. Later, in his private communication chamber, Zek connected with Commander Reyes. The transmission quality was poor. The Toth CT station's communications array had been damaged in the battle, but her face appeared on screen, a deep gash across her forehead partially sealed with some type of medical adhesive. Despite this injury, that familiar smile remained. Your intervention was unexpected, Zek began carefully. But appreciated, I hope, Reyes replied. 3,000 researchers would have died otherwise. Your tactics disturbed our military analysts, he continued. The casualty rates you accepted among your own crews were necessary, she interrupted, and anticipated. Every crew member knew the risks when they volunteered for this mission. Volunteered. Zek scales shifted to a surprise blue. This wasn't a military assignment. Reyes laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her wound. Admiral, our entire defense fleet was 4 days out, just like yours. These were research vessels, retrofitted with minimal armaments. The crews voted to engage rather than retreat. Zek struggled to process this. You allowed a democratic decision about a military engagement. It's how we operate in crisis, she explained, her expression growing serious. Humans perform best when they choose their risks, not when risks are imposed upon them. The transmission began to degrade, but before it failed completely, Reyes leaned closer to the camera. Your military is preparing a formal analysis of our tactics, aren't they? When Zek acknowledged this, her smile took on a quality he had never seen before, something almost sad. It won't help them, she said softly. By the time we fight again, we'll have developed entirely new approaches. We never danced the same way twice. The connection dissolved into static, leaving Zek with the uncomfortable realization that the humans viewed warfare as a dance, improvised, creative, and ever-evolving, while the rest of the galaxy treated it as a mathematical equation to be solved, once and followed precisely thereafter. Zek observed the diplomatic reception from a quiet corner of the Grand Hall, his aged scales now a permanent shade of contemplative blue-gray. 2 decades of watching humanity's rise had worn away his earlier alarm, replacing it with a resigned fascination. Your expression suggests deep thoughts, Chancellor, came a familiar voice. He turned to find Admiral Reyes approaching, moving with the same purposeful stride, despite her now silver hair. Time had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, but the smile remained unchanged. I was recalling our first meeting, he admitted, when I believed the Vecturian Confederacy held all advantages in our relationship. She laughed softly. Many still believe that. Your High Council certainly does. A server droid offered them beverages, a fruity human concoction for Reyes and fermented nectar for Zek. They moved toward a quieter alcove overlooking Earth's nightscape. 27 species, Zek mused, gesturing toward the gathered delegates. 5 were actively engaged in genocidal conflicts when humans first achieved interstellar travel. Now they share trade routes and research facilities. Peace serves everyone's interests, Reyes replied with characteristic simplicity. Yet it eluded us for millennia before your arrival. Zek fixed all 4 of his eyes on her. How do humans accomplish in decades what the oldest spacefaring civilizations failed to achieve in thousands of years? Reyes sipped her drink, that smile momentarily hidden behind a glass. We discovered something unique about interspecies relations. And that is, every species desperately wants to be understood. She gestured subtly toward the crystalline fire ambassador, whose faceted body gleamed under the reception lights. The fair communicate primarily through light wavelengths. For centuries, other species reduced their complex philosophical concepts to simplified translations. And humans didn't. We created interfaces that could perceive and reproduce their full light language. We learned to think in photonic concepts. Her smile widened slightly. In return, the fire gave us their atmospheric processing technology, which we deployed on 3 previously uninhabitable worlds. Zekthar's mandibles clicked softly in amazement. You did this with every species. Of course. The Drex respond to dominance displays, so we approach them with confidence bordering on arrogance. The aquatic Melosians communicate through electrical signals, so we developed bioelectric translators. The gaseous Vrel exchange chemical compounds as language, so we. You studied everyone. Zekthar interrupted, a chill running through his exoskeleton as understanding dawned. Not just their biology or technology, but their psychology, their cultural triggers, their deepest social needs. Race didn't deny it. Knowledge is power, Chancellor. Humans have always been curious about what makes others tick. Something in her tone made his primary heart flutter with unease. To what end, Admiral? Why position humanity at the center of galactic politics? For a moment, her smile faded completely. She gazed out at the stars, something ancient and weary flickering across her features. Have your astronomers noted any unusual readings from the galactic rim, particularly in the Sagittarius sector? Confused by the apparent change of subject, Zekthar shook his head. Not to my knowledge. They will, she said quietly. Soon. Before he could press further, a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. A diplomatic incident was unfolding between the Taurian and Nexari delegations, ancient enemies now arguing over territorial rights to a newly discovered wormhole. Excuse me, Chancellor, Reyes said, her smile returning as she straightened her uniform. Duty calls. Zekthar watched as she approached the quarreling ambassadors. Within moments, her presence seemed to calm them. She spoke a few words to each, placed a hand briefly on the Taurian's arm membrane, and nodded respectfully to the Nexari's eye stalks. The tension dissipated visibly. Within minutes, the former enemies were engaged in what appeared to be productive conversation. Remarkable, whispered a voice beside Zekthar. He turned to find Counselor Vex, his oldest rival on the High Council. She diffused that situation without translators or formal protocols. Yes, Zekthar replied grimly. She knows exactly which strings to pull. The evidence is irrefutable. Zekthar's voice echoed through the High Council chamber, his aged frame trembling with the force of his conviction. Humans have positioned themselves at the nexus of every major trade route, diplomatic channel, and technological exchange in the known galaxy. The circular chamber, with its ancient stone architecture symbolizing the unchanging nature of Vecturian governance, felt suffocating today. 17 council members stared down at him from tiered seats, their compound eyes reflecting varying degrees of concern, skepticism, and annoyance. Councillor Vex activated his speaking light. And what harm has come of this human centrality? Our economic prosperity has quadrupled. Our ancient enemies now trade peacefully with us. Even the Corvin threat has diminished significantly. That prosperity creates dependence, Zekthar countered, manipulating the holographic display to show a complex web of interstellar connections with Earth at its center. 93% of critical resource distribution now passes through human-controlled channels. 78% of our advanced research relies on human computational systems. High Chancellor Kree Vox raised a limb for silence. Chancellor Zekthar, your concerns have been noted throughout your long and distinguished career. Yet in 3 decades, humans have never once leveraged their position against us or any species. Because they're waiting for something, Zekthar insisted. Admiral Rice questioned me about astronomical anomalies at the galactic rim. Our scientists have detected nothing, but humans have redeployed 46% of their deep space monitoring network to the Sagittarius sector. A ripple of murmurs passed through the council. This was new information. How did you obtain this intelligence? Demanded Security Minister Thelvas. I have my sources, Zekthar replied evasively, not willing to reveal his network of human sympathizers who shared his concerns about centralized power. The council debated briefly among themselves before High Chancellor Krevox delivered their judgment. While we appreciate your vigilance, we find no cause for concern. Humans have proven themselves valuable allies. Their technological insights have advanced our civilization by centuries. Their diplomatic efforts have created unprecedented stability. Whatever their interest in astronomical phenomena, it poses no threat to the Confederacy. Later that night, Zekthar sat in his private chambers, composing messages to contacts in 17 different species. In each, he outlined his evidence of human manipulation, their suspicious focus on the Sagittarius sector, and his fears for galactic independence. He had just transmitted the final message when his security system announced an unregistered visitor. Before he could respond, his chamber door slid open, revealing Admiral Reyes. Breaking into the private residence of a Vecturian chancellor is a serious diplomatic breach, he noted, unsurprised by her appearance. Less serious than sharing classified intelligence with foreign powers, she countered, that familiar smile present but subdued. Without invitation, she seated herself across from him. Your warnings won't have the effect you hope for. The galaxy deserves to know it's being manipulated, he insisted. The galaxy is being saved, she corrected gently, whether it wants to be or not. She removed a small projector from her pocket and activated it. A three-dimensional star map appeared between them, focusing on the Sagittarius sector. At first, Zekthar saw nothing unusual, then noticed a subtle distortion in the light from several distant stars. What am I looking at? He asked. The beginning of the end, Reyes answered, her smile fading completely. We've known about it for almost 40 years, a cosmic phenomenon unlike anything in recorded history. Why haven't your scientists published their findings? Why the secrecy? Publishing would cause panic. Preparation is better than panic. She deactivated the projector. Humanity has been preparing the galaxy for a crisis that most species can't even comprehend. We didn't position ourselves at the center of everything out of ambition, but necessity. You should have shared this, Zekthar said, his anger giving way to confusion. With whom? Your High Council, who dismisses every concern. The Fire, who would retreat into philosophical contemplation. The Drex, who would seek to weaponize it. Reyes leaned forward. We've tried sharing this burden before. No one was ready to hear it. The emergency alert shattered the pre-dawn silence of Zekthar's residence. He activated his communication terminal with trembling limbs, his aged body responding slowly to the surge of stress hormones. The face of Junior Science Minister Krull appeared, her scales a bright orange of alarm. Chancellor, Outpost Gamma 9 has gone silent. Before communication was lost, they transmitted, you should see for yourself. The screen filled with grainy footage from the outpost's long-range sensors. At first, Zekthar saw nothing unusual in the starfield, then noticed a peculiar absence, a perfect circle of absolute darkness against the backdrop of stars, as if someone had cut a hole in the fabric of reality itself. Analysis suggests it's approximately 3 light-years in diameter and expanding, Krell continued. Whatever it is, it absorbs all electromagnetic radiation. We can't scan it, can't see through it. Where is it headed? Zekthar interrupted, a cold dread settling into his primary heart. Current trajectory puts it on course for the Corvin core worlds within 14 days. 17 hours later, Zekthar's diplomatic shuttle descended toward Earth's lunar surface, where an emergency summit had been hastily convened. Representatives from 23 spacefaring civilizations had gathered in a state-of-the-art facility that hadn't existed during his last visit 3 years earlier. Inside the circular chamber, chaos reigned. The Corvin ambassador, her typically immaculate battle regalia disheveled, was shouting accusations at a stoic human official. You knew this was coming. Your fleet began evacuating civilians from our border worlds 4 days ago, before we detected anything. Admiral Rice entered the chamber, flanked by human scientists and military officers. Her once dark hair was now completely silver, her face deeply lined, but she moved with the same purposeful energy Zecther remembered from their first meeting decades ago. We've been tracking this phenomenon for 37 years, she announced without preamble, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the room. We call it the Void. It's a spatial anomaly that consumes matter, energy, and possibly space-time itself. The hologram showed the Void's projected path through the galaxy's spiral arm, directly through heavily populated sectors. The Corvan Empire will be the first major civilization in its path, Rice continued, followed by the Zentari Collective, the Fire Communion, and eventually the Vecturian Confederacy. If you've known about this for decades, why didn't you warn us? Demanded the Fire Ambassador, his crystalline body pulsing with indignant light patterns. We did, Rice replied, her smile making its first appearance, tight and without humor. Through official channels, scientific papers, diplomatic notes, each species dismissed our findings as human paranoia or misinterpretation of data. She gestured, and a holographic display expanded to show a complex network of defensive installations, modified shield generators, and evacuation corridors. This is why we pushed expansion into sectors you considered worthless, why we encouraged militarization along specific borders, why we integrated ourselves into every aspect of galactic infrastructure. Her voice grew softer. We were preparing for this moment. Zecthar moved closer to the hologram, studying the intricate defense plan that spanned thousands of star systems. These modifications to our shield technology, they're the same improvements you offered us 20 years ago. Rice nodded. Improvements your scientists rejected as theoretically unsound, yes. For hours, the summit devolved into accusations, denials, and panic. Species that had mistrusted each other for millennia now struggled to comprehend cooperation on the scale Rice proposed. Through it all, she maintained a calm certainty that Zecther found both reassuring and unsettling. During a brief recess, he found her alone in an observation lounge, staring at Earth through the transparent dome. You knew this day would come, he said quietly. It's why you warned me all those years ago. I hoped you might convince others to listen, she admitted. But in the end, it didn't matter. We proceeded with our preparations regardless. How did humans discover the Void before species with far more advanced astronomical technology? Her smile returned, tinged with sadness. We were looking for it. Why would you look for something you had no reason to suspect existed? Because humans have always imagined apocalypses, she explained. We've written thousands of stories about cosmic horrors, universe-ending phenomena, extinction-level events. When you spend your evolutionary history constantly scanning the horizon for threats, you sometimes spot the real ones before anyone else. The newly constructed Galactic Concordat headquarters gleamed in the artificial light of Earth's orbital platform. Zekthar's transport pod moved slowly through the security checkpoints, his aged body supported by medical technology that kept his 3 remaining hearts functioning despite the accumulated stress of the past years. The Great Hall, with representatives from all surviving civilizations, fell silent as the ancient Vecturian was escorted to a place of honor near the central podium. Many present knew of his early warnings, his long association with humanity, and his crucial role during the Void Crisis. Chancellor greeted a familiar voice. He turned to find Admiral Alina Rice approaching, her body now supported by advanced medical exoskeleton technology. Time had taken its toll, yet that smile remained unchanged after all these decades. Admiral, he acknowledged, or should I say Concordat Director? Just Alina today, she replied, settling beside him as the ceremony preparations continued around them. This is a day for new beginnings, not old titles. Together they observed the hall. The Corvin delegation, once the proudest warriors in the galaxy, now represented the remnants of a shattered empire. Barely a dozen worlds remained of their once vast territory. The Zentari, the Fire, the Drex, all had lost significant populations and territory to the void before humanity's defensive measures had finally contained the expansion. "The galaxy is forever changed," Zekthar observed. "Yes," Rise agreed. "But surviving species have finally learned what humanity has always known. We are stronger together than apart." The Galactic Concordat Treaty being signed today would bind the remaining civilizations into a cooperative governance structure, with humanity, inevitably, at its center. Not through conquest or domination, but through the proven value of human foresight, adaptability, and coordination. "You were right to warn them about us," Rice said quietly, breaking protocol to approach his seat. "From your perspective, our manipulation of galactic affairs must have seemed threatening." "At first," he admitted. "Later, merely puzzling. You positioned yourselves for leadership, yet never seized power when opportunities arose." "We didn't want power for its own sake," she explained. "We wanted everyone prepared for the crisis we knew was coming. Yet you knew other species wouldn't believe you without evidence they couldn't ignore." Her smile softened with an emotion Zekthar had learned to recognize as regret. "We tried direct warnings first. Scientific papers, diplomatic briefings. When those failed, we had to take a longer approach, building infrastructure, creating interdependence, establishing ourselves as essential coordinators." A chime signaled the ceremony's commencement. Rise rose to join the human delegation, but paused. "I've always valued your perspective, Chancellor. Your skepticism made our preparations better." As she walked away, Zekthar reflected on the long journey from their first meeting, when he'd mistaken her smile for a predator's assessment rather than a guardian's commitment. The ceremony proceeded with solemn dignity. Species that had warred for millennia now pledged cooperation under humanity's guidance. When Race delivered the keynote address, her words resonated through the chamber. "The Void Crisis has taken much from us all," she acknowledged. "Entire civilizations diminished, billions of lives lost, countless worlds consumed. Yet it has given us something precious, unity of purpose. What we could not achieve through diplomacy alone, we have forged in the crucible of shared survival." From his privileged position, Zekthar observed the reactions of the assembled delegates. Where once there might have been resentment at human centrality, now there was only grateful acknowledgement of their proven foresight. As the ceremony concluded, Zekthar felt a familiar flutter in his primary heart, a warning sensation he had first experienced during that initial meeting with Captain Rice so many decades ago. His medical implants registered the anomaly, administering stabilizing compounds automatically. Rice noticed his discomfort and moved to his side. "Are you well, old friend?" "My time grows short," he admitted, "but I am content to have witnessed this day." She took his gnarled hand in hers, that smile somehow both ancient and unchanged. "You once feared our influence. Do you still?" Zekthar considered the question carefully. "I fear what any species might do with the power humanity now wields. But I no longer fear humanity itself." "Why not?" "Because I finally understand what your smile always meant," he replied. "Not a threat, but a promise that you would do whatever necessary to ensure our survival, even when we fought against our own salvation." As delegates from across the galaxy mingled in newfound cooperation, Zekthar watched humanity take its place at the center of galactic governance, not as conquerors, but as guardians who had seen the darkness coming and prepared when no one else would listen. The warning had been there all along, hidden in plain sight behind a human captain's smile.